Right, we're back and we're moving on to the next chapter, prohibition. When we got into the prohibition part, I was looking for, way we look at prohibition as we know it today. But you went way back in prohibition, I thought, and you really touched on the effect that religion has in prohibition. And
Well, I think it's, yeah.
yeah. So go ahead. If you want, that's what my question is. What effect did religion have on prohibition?
I think people underestimate the impact that all religious prohibitions have had on our society here in Western society anyway. And I thought it was important to go back to the earliest prohibitions because, religiously, or the religious prohibitions really weren't even stopping people from using this plant. It was only telling them to use it at certain times and places, and then it was only for the priest to use the temple, and then eventually they couldn't even use it, and anyone using it was killed even.
Yes.
And so, a lot of times people think that, prohibition is something that evolved in the last century. Well, really, prohibitions and the persecution of people using plant medicines to heal and enlighten themselves has been going on for a very, very long time, and it's not something new. And if you understand the history of prohibition, you see the very same tactics coming up that started with the Book of Law at 600 BC, when a path to lies was just put out into the public and people sucked it up. And ever since then, these prohibitionists have used the media to create a frenzy about drugs in a way that has been very harmful to not just the drug users, but society as a whole, I would suggest. Mm-hmm. And so, the prohibition is nothing new. And I think also when you gain a sense of how long this battle has been between, plant users and the military complex, if you call it that, you get a sense of what we're really up against on one hand, but then I think also get a sense that this kind of cultural umbrella is starting to fade. That we're actually just now getting out of the dark ages, as they were called, and so I really have a great sense of hope for humanity because these ancient prohibitions are being seen for what they are, which is really a charade for control.
Yeah, because I know when I read that section and I was reading it, I was just I was going wow inside my head and going like people were being like killed because of the fact that they didn't follow somebody else's belief, and it just didn't make right to me. So I was seeing it as religion was the spot before government. Before governments were ruling the people, religion was ruling the people, and then governments come along, and now governments are trying to turn people to think that the way that they want to be, just like the religion was.
Well, it's a back and forth battle, right?
Yeah.
People just created government to take power away from the church and these religious zealots. And so these religious zealots just didn't give up and say, oh, now there's government. We can't impose our moral beliefs upon the population. They've just consolidated their energy and focused on taking control of the political power. So they couldn't just erase government. Believe me, most people, religious extremists, would rather have no government at all, so that they could just take full control and kill everyone that doesn't believe them. And
yeah.
So, this back and forth battle between these religious powers using government to impose their moral beliefs and people struggling for their freedoms, this is a long and historical battle. This isn't something that just kind of erupted in the 60s or where they gained control in the 20s or 30s. It's been a very long and hard-fought battle, and millions of people have died on our side, not theirs. It's not like the pagans went and killed the Christians very often because the Christians did their thing. The Christians came after us. So it's like millions and millions and millions of pagans have died in this, essentially,
Yeah.
or had their lives taken away in ruin and their houses burned, their property seized, or
Yeah.
condemned and driven out of town, or whatever the case is. It's been a very tragic circumstance, and as I think it was Norm Stamper said from Leap in the United States, next to slavery, prohibition is the worst set of policies that humanity has ever enacted.
To quote another member of Leap, Peter Crisp, he always talks about on Time for Hemp. The first prohibition that was out there consisted of 3 people: Adam and Eve and the Creator. And the Creator said, "Do not eat from that tree of life," right? And what happened? We all know he ate the apple. So if one creation can't watch 2 people, then how does prohibition expect to work over millions of people across the world?
That's a funny way of putting it. I haven't heard that.
Oh yeah, he says our Creator, he couldn't watch over 2 people, so how do they expect everything else to work together? Okay, let's jump to the next. Let's jump to the next one, the counterculture one. In there, you talk about for a while there, cannabis had lost some appeal during because of the psychedelic drugs, which brings us to the LSD. What was the effect of the psychedelic era on the cannabis movement?
Well, certainly cannabis was around in the 1950s and early 60s. It hadn't been completely erased among the jazz musicians and sailors as well. People that traveled to other parts of the world where hash in particular was available.
Yeah.
And there's been good hash available for thousands of years. So people were still smoking that through the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And so it was around. But really what made the use of cannabis explode towards the end of the 1960s was the psychedelic community that just in a way it came out of nowhere in the American scene. Ironically, through the U.S. military and their attempts to control people in the way they think. And so it was really this, like I say, sort of explosion in creativity and freedom and a sense of awakening, and that really brought cannabis use more to the more common people. And ironically, the Vietnam War as well was a big factor in that, because cannabis was being grown and used in Vietnam, and the soldiers went over there, and all of a sudden it was very common to not only smoke grass, but even to smoke opium, and to really question the motivations of the American government in general. And so a lot of Vietnam vets came back, needing to supply their heroin addiction by selling pot and having a real hate on for the American government. And so the return of the vets from Vietnam was also instrumental in the revival of cannabis, because a lot of them even brought the speed back to Vietnam. And as the song Steve Earle song, Copperhead Road, people started to make an economy out of it here in North America.
Yeah, yes, that chapter I found very interesting, because you got right into the Timothy O'Leary. You were talking about the way that they traveled around the country, and then, like you say, you went right into the Vietnam War. The movie that we just watched, it touched on the Vietnam War and the effect that it had on the cannabis culture as well. Into the next chapter. We've got 2 more chapters here. Cannabis Today chapter. You're talking about the politics, some of the politics in there. Does it seem that there are many politicians who believe that the prohibition of cannabis is wrong, but they refuse to speak out for one reason or another, whether their party may be against it, or that they fear that if they talk about cannabis, it just won't people won't vote for it?
Yeah, they're afraid of their religious right, and some of them should be, given where they live, because the religious right can be very vocal and
Yeah.
very focused. If you say something that pisses them off, then you're a target to them, and so that fear, is quite a dominant factor. I've heard of even locally in Victoria, right, where we live in a relatively aware society, but there's a lot of pockets within Victoria, the old guard, where there's lots of money and power, and they're not at all wanting to legalize pot. They're that 1%, right?
Right.
And so, that 1% is not on board. And so, the politicians, pay a lot of attention to that. And so, the combination of those two factors makes it so that very few politicians are really willing to speak out. Unless there is a clear majority or they have some other personal life experience that makes them aware of the follies of prohibition. And so in that case, it depends on their political stripes. But there are, members of the Conservative Party that criticize the Canadian government for what they do as well. But and there's members of the Liberal Party and the NDP that are not at all supportive of legalization. So like there's, even within the parties themselves, there is an agreement on how to go. But there are more and more politicians that are questioning it, certainly here in BC and more outside of Canada, I think, than even in this country at this point, because you don't want to piss off the conservatives if you can help it.
Yeah. As of today, the way I know it, when it comes to the political parties, it's really just the Conservatives that are out against it as far as cannabis, because the Green Party, taxation and regulation, the Liberals, we know that they're at their convention, yet it's policy, but yet in their convention the delegates all agreed that taxation and regulation is the way to go. The NDP, they want to have a discussion on it, maybe another study, and the Conservatives, we know, are going to jail. So you got to hope that the next election that something good will come of all this, because the Conservatives are
The
the
next
only party.
election or next generation. Like, we're friends with kids that are in the Conservative Party at the University of Victoria, and they've tried to put it on the platform to legalize pot, because from a conservative economic perspective,
Right.
The war on drugs doesn't make sense. They need to legalize it and regulate it and tax it.
Yeah.
So, and so, but you're quite right. We need a major change in government here and a major shift in policy. The Liberals have not been impressive at all when they did have power there.
That's right.
On this matter. And NDP, it looks hopeful, but I'm not certain at all that they will make this a priority. I think our real hope is in court, and that's where I put my focus. And now that I have my book, I can likely get qualified as an expert witness in court. And really, I've never focused on politics as being the vehicle for change. Politics is a reflection of the change that's already occurred.
We got to pause for the YouTube cause. We'll be right back.